Welcome everyone to today's webinar, which I think you'll find very fascinating. I'm your host and moderator, Jon Hansen, and we're going to be talking about the age of digital enablement. Now, I'm going to give you all a few minutes to come on in and sign. I want to remind everybody that the session is 60 minutes. However, it is a very much interactive session. In other words, as you listen and we talk and delve into these important areas, I'm going to encourage you to ask questions throughout in the chat, certainly, or you can use the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that. If you have a question for someone in the panel that you'd like to ask a specific question, let me know and we can hook you up, because this is what we want it to be. We want it to be conversational. This isn't a perfunctory Q&A. This is actually trying to really get into the nuts and bolts of digital enablement and what it means. So I'll just give you all a few more minutes to come in. And in the meantime, as we're waiting, I'm going to start with a little bit of the background on our hosts who have made this webinar possible. I'm going to start with welcoming Shira from SCI Group. Shira Yoskovich, how are you? If you could, just during this time of entry, give a little bit of idea about SCI. Who are they? What do they do? Nothing too long, but certainly to the point.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. So SCI is a Canadian-based 3PL, third-party logistics company. We've been operating for about 30 years in both the B2B and the B2C frames. We have about roughly 33 distribution centers and depots across Canada. We have about 3,000 employees and more than 300 customers. We also have 8 transportation centers. So we are a full service 3PL, and we actually operate throughout North America, although our bases are in Canada. And we are fundamentally centered on what is the value add that we can provide to clients. We look very hard for offering our best-in-class expertise, our thought leadership on how to solve our clients' problems. We concentrate in 3 predominant verticals: omni-retail, healthcare, and the technology space. And as I said, we offer full service wall to wall. So that's transportation and contract logistics. But then also we have additional products such as our business intelligence and data products. And we also offer a number of value added services to clients.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that introduction. And, as we get into this, we'll understand how the 3 of your unique companies came together to make that enablement possible. Yeah. Let's now turn to Sadish about Körber. Tell us a little bit, please.
Thanks for having me, John. So Körber Supply Chain, we are a global supply chain software solutions provider. We help customers in the retail space enable with our software solutions to solve the complex supply chain solutions with our product portfolio in warehouse management, order management solutions, robotics, automation, and transport optimization spend. But those are few of the products. But we do provide the breadth of the solutions across end-to-end supply chain, but with the focus, of course, on solving our customer solutions.
Okay, now this is interesting because I'm going to lead this, and thank you for that, Sajid, and welcome Neil Sharma. Tell us a little bit about Spice, because one of the things that I want to be able to nail down here is each of your organizations individually has a key role to play, but collectively you've come together in true, modularity. In other words, it's the best of breed. I hate using that term. It's almost ubiquitously, useless to a certain degree because everybody says that. But Neil, when you look at what SCI and Körber are doing, where does Spice fit into all of this? What is Spice? Because you've been around for quite a while.
Thank you very much, John, and good afternoon to everybody. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're at in North America. So Spice digitizes supply chains. And our focus is both from a software as a service provider as well as a supply chain consulting services provider. Our aim is to build digitized supply chains. And from a technology perspective, what we're doing is building as that graphic down there is attempting to depict, we build out large-scale trading partner data networks, essentially connecting large enterprises with their ecosystem trading partners, suppliers, customers, logistics organizations, and so on and so forth. Our customers are primarily fairly large enterprises with a global footprint, or upper mid-market companies with, again, large supply chain driven business processes. We look at, from a solutions perspective, as I mentioned, a software as a service. We have a variety of SaaS solutions that we help our customers that include things such as EDI and B2B technology, B2B integration technology, vendor portals, and so on and so forth. And then we bring thought leadership to the table, which is our relationship with Shira and SCI Logistics. We bring, both consulting as well as a services relationship to organizations that are going through digital transformation. And, we'll go through market through a variety of partners. We go to market directly with our customers, but also with some very important partners worldwide, both on the product side as well as on consulting and services side. So that's us.
Hey, well, it sounds interesting, and I want to go to all three of you just a 30-second pause. But one of the things that came to my mind, and tell me if I'm right on this, Shira, is that what you look at with your organizations is that you have unique capabilities that are interchangeable, but there is a collaboration and a communication process between each organization. In other words, you're not operating in independent silos, even though you have independent elements of the overall solution. There is a good collaboration communication method, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that communication and that integration of thought is fundamentally what makes the partnership excel. It's what, as SCI, what we were definitely looking for in terms of partners who understood our vision, understood where we were trying to go, and fundamentally what client and market problems we were looking to solve, but who would also bring to us their own thought leadership about what great looks like and what they were seeing in the market, because they just cast a different net than we do. And so I think what really makes this partnership very strong, but also just whenever we're looking to engage in partners, is that level of simpatico, that level of co-thought leadership. But fundamentally, we all have to stay in our lanes also to execute. So it's a bit of that combination effect.
See, and I mean, we always talk about collaboration and communications as being a key element of success. And we often put that onus or burden on the end user, saying, how well do you communicate within your departments? But you actually have a major role, that connectivity of being able to collaborate in terms of your success. You're bringing that to the table with your shared client. I mean, is that a safe way to say it?
I think that's exactly the way to say it. I mean, this is about really making sure that there is that clear vision and we're all moving on the path together. But every partner in the chain has a role to play and has a measurement of success that feeds into the greater success.
All right. And Satish, I take it you would agree. Let me go to this and to start, because, and again, I don't want to go into a big history of each of you, but how long have you been doing what you're doing, Satish?
25 plus years building supply chain software products in warehouse management, order management, and point of sale. So yeah, long time.
All right. And Neil, and again, your position with Spice been around a long time. How long have you been doing this?
Well, Spice as an organization is around 11 years old, so we've been doing that for a while. But personally, I've been involved in B2B integration technology and broadly integration technology for decades. I don't want to remember how many decades. I'm just going to say decades. Leave it there.
I know you started when you were 10, just like me.
Yep, that's right.
And Sherry, just before we go to the next slide, I mean, you've been in this for a while as well, hasn't you? You've seen a lot of evolution occur, haven't you?
I've been lucky to see a lot of evolution. So I've been with SCI for a couple of years, but I've been in supply chain transformation for over 25 years. And, here in North America, certainly, but I've also spent time doing it in Europe and in Asia. So I've been at this a while.
All right. Well, let's go to the agenda today, and we're breaking it down to 3 areas we're going to cover. Those in the audience and listening and tuning in, we're going to talk about what is the real digital landscape. And it's kind of, it seems like an elementary question, but believe me, it'll lay a foundation of understanding as we progress to the next section of how do we move seeing data to capitalizing on it. The digital pipeline, I kind of like the glass tunnel analogy, which we'll introduce to you. And then we'll have an own discussion on how do we truly create a digital enablement? How do we make that happen? So right off the bat, I want to start here. And Sajid, I'm going to start with a quote from you in an article recently. You've been interviewed for. Digital transformation in the world's supply chain means transforming your ecosystem. And what is an ecosystem? Transformation of people, process, technology. Here's the thing. We all hear these terminology, ecosystems, all of these things, but what does it really mean? I mean, again, you hear all these words and all this description. How is it different, or the perception different from your perspective as it relates to what an ecosystem should be?
So when you talk about supply chain ecosystem, it's at the end of the day, how do I satisfy my customer requirements? Is what the customer needs. It is the make sure that the pre and the post of a sale in a typical retail world is satisfied. But when you talk about that, to make that happen, there are many systems involved. You don't need to have all of them in day one. But how do you define your success? And how do you combine the right technology enablement with the right people and giving them the visibility and the process to be able to make sure that they're successful? And you talk about EDI, you talk about OMS, you talk about WMS, but there's much more systems in your ecosystem. And you need to define which is critical aspects of that. What is your problem statement? And ensure that you're focusing on the success of that than trying to do too many things at the same time. So that's what I mean by the ecosystem, and how do we enable that with the right technology.
So Neil, I'll go to you, and then Sharon, by the way, just to correct everyone, it's the glass pipeline. I think I said the glass tunnel, a little bit of tunnel vision there, but nonetheless, keep that in mind. Neil, first with you, when you hear what Satish has to say, I mean, does that pretty well capture what an ecosystem is?
Yeah, I think I echo those sentiments. I guess from our perspective and point of view, from a digital landscape ecosystem transformation, we focus very heavily on external integrations and the data that comes in as a result of that, which is often forgotten and really often misunderstood. Its value and importance in overall digital transformation of supply chains. And so our focus is really on that. But we also recognize that we're one cog in this big wheel of digital transformation. And ultimately, to Satish's point, it's all about the customer. So if you keep the customer at the forefront, the end customer of our organization, of our customers, and they're all focused on either the consumer or the end customer that they're serving. And that digital transformation, you work backwards from there, but you've got to run it all the way right back into operational excellence at this point. And I guess the key difference there was, I think there was a lot of focus in the past 10 plus years in really improving the front end engagement technology for digital transformation. That's where a lot of the focus went. But now, with so many things changing in the past 2-3 years, with COVID, with conflict, with inflation coming in, we find organizations are getting very focused on back-end digital transformation of the back of the house, as I would call it, and supply chain is critical.
Okay, now sure, this is an interesting point here, because the pandemic has been a trigger. It showed our weakness of what I think Neil just talked about, is looking at the front-end architecture. Is if you have that in order, everything will be fine. But sure, when you look at taking it to the back end and throughout, I mean, that's really where a lot of the hard work and the effort has to come in, because, you know, you can only build out on a strong foundation. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I think, you know, it is an interesting conversation to have, because oftentimes the market does think that, you know, if I solve the front end and I make that part work, the back end net will necessarily follow. And that's frankly just not the case. I think, you know, when you start to consider that, you know, B2B versus B2C, and even, you know, B2C is a banner in and of itself. There's different modes and cuts and channels within that. Each one of those has its own personality, if you will. They have their own consumer behaviors, customer behaviors, visibility requirements, things like that. If you're only sort of dealing with the front layer, if you will, you're not actually getting into the how does it all function in a scalable kind of way. If you're willing as an organization to build out layer upon layer in order to serve each one of those front ends one-to-one, then you know, that's certainly one approach. If I think about our position at the 3PL, we actually have to get this all to work in synchronicity, because our ecosystem is a combination of a number of ecosystems that fundamentally need to feed off the same inventory. They need to feed off the same geographical requirement. They need to feed off the same logistics network and things like that. And so the only way to really get that to scale and meet the ultimate customer experience, right? Supply chain is the operational embodiment of brand. You can do whatever you want to the front end of the brand, but if you don't address how you operationalize the brand doesn't hold.
Okay, so within this concept and understanding, and I want to go back to you, Neil, and then to Satish. I mean, Shira mentioned something interesting. The pandemic was a great awakening. At least that's what I'm getting the impression of, is that people were dealing with that method. Now they're finding out, well, we've got to work like this. How do you come together and as an organization or different organizations doing different things? Like, how did the three of your organizations come together? I want to lead then into, with Satish, some of the case study references of success. But how did you discover each other? How did you build that external connectivity and partnership?
Definitely. So I think, as Shira mentioned, scale, but in addition to scale, the technology should be nimble and be able to adapt to change. And with people using that change to be able to pivot. So here's a case study and a use case. So one of our retail customer in the health and wellness sciences, they were on a roadmap to implement the store inventory visibility and the ship to home functionality within the OMS. But that was a 6-month plus roadmap. Typically, that's how you do. But when COVID hit, as you know, all the stores got closed. No one is going. And you have this huge inventory of sitting in the store of 2,000 plus store. So we were able to pivot and enable the system. Yes, technology is there, but identifying the technology with the people and the process to say, how do I make this inventory visible? How do I use that inventory that is sitting idle to be able to ship to home in a 4 to 6 week, and bringing in all this 2,000 plus stuff is a huge success factor out there, is a case study. Yes, we had to do that for COVID, but the case I'm making is the technology should be nimble, able to scale, and able to pivot. And there are many use cases that come to play is identifying those and be able to adapt to changes.
All right, Neil, build on it, because I'm listening to this rollout. I mean, what you're really looking at is everyone talks about supply chain resiliency and adaptability and ability to respond. So let's break it down like this: is if you look at those companies who were successful at responding, utilizing the methodologies and ecosystem that the three of you are talking about, how were they able to respond? In what ways were they able to respond better And let's say someone who is, again, and I think Sherry, you said build the front end, but when the front end's gone, what do we have? I mean, what was the difference, Neil, that organizations have taking this different back end architectural approach or incorporating that?
Yeah, so that's fantastic. I might actually give you just a couple of different examples. One from the work that we've done quite recently, and there was an aha moment, and I want to bring that out. And I'd like to then kind of pivot over to Shiva, because she and I have had some very common experiences in this area. So let me give the first one anecdotally. We're working with a major manufacturing client in North America, high-tech manufacturer. Getting product out very quickly to market mattered a lot to them. Very successful product. And, big SAP implementation. So lots of good big systems in place. But they forgot about one thing, which is, supply chain excellence. And we were brought in, and just anecdotally, we walked into the distribution center and they said, here's our problem. And they pointed to their receiving docks. And guess what? Inventory was piled up sky high, and there were little markers put onto them saying this is red, green, yellow. What they could not receive in their DC would not be sent out to their national distribution channels to their customers, and no sales. And what was the problem? The problem was very simple. Big systems, but they forgot that a lot of the data that they needed in order to receive that product into their DC came from their trading partners. So no advance ship notices, you can't receive, you're receiving manually, which just creates a visual bottleneck that you can actually see. And that was the aha moment for them. And they quickly realized that, that to extend out this digital transformation, they had to really connect up their trading partners. That was an interesting sort of moment for me as well. But let me pivot over to Shira. So Shira, you and I have worked on a number of implementations, and the one that comes to mind was with a major telco. So I'll hand that back to you. Perhaps you can describe that, and I'll be happy to chime in, since it was really your story.
No, thanks, Neil. I think it, as you said, it was both of our journeys. So this is where I was actually leading supply chain at a telco. And one of those things were very heavy brand focused, very customer centric. John, to your point earlier, they had paid a lot of attention to the front end. But when you think about, so major retailers, big box retailers, were all, I would say, somewhat digitally enabled at that time. At least the major EDI transactions were covered. But when those transactions would come into us, they were, and I mean this quite literally, auto fax. They were turning into fax paper printouts on our side that then a team of 4 coordinators had to receive, input manually, swivel, put the order information into our 3PL at the time, swivel again, get the orders adjusted however need be with the vendors, etc. And this was a 1,000% manual exercise once these electronic transactions came in. And from an order of magnitude standpoint, this was about 2,000 to 3,000 orders or change orders in a week, and over like Christmas holiday peak period, that would double. And so at the same time as that was happening, there was a lot of SLA failures because everything was manual, right? And to be frank, we had even been served notice by one major retailer that as soon as peak was over, they were disengaging from us because of the order SLA misses. So this is a pretty challenging systemic problem for us. And combination of DC fulfillment direct to store, really about as complex as we could have tried to make this. And then adding to the volume, if you will, just before that peak period, we signed another major conglomerate of 3 banners, all direct to store, that in effect doubled our peak volume again. So we went from trying to manage 2,000 to 3,000 per week ineffectively to manage nearly 10,000 per week seriously ineffectively, right? And so at that time, the other thing that was happening was because everything was manual, no ability to effectively generate transactions or instructions to our trading partners. no ability to look at inventory accuracy. So therefore, we were bleeding off inventory before we knew it. I mean, basically just big snowball effect. And so at the time we engaged with Neil and his team, and you basically did like a very crash course, 6 weeks. Let's get ourselves enabled. Let's focus in really on where we need to focus in on the major transactions. We didn't try and boil the ocean. We just major transactions. And we relied massively heavily on Neil and his team for their market expertise. They knew these retailers. They had already gone live with these retailers with other trading partners. So they were able to really take I would say, a very strong hand with us and guide us through the process about what was needed, what wasn't, etc. And over time we expanded the transaction list, but this was really, we had a very narrow window. We were solving a very specific customer satisfaction and frankly workload problem. And the punchline to that is, we were able to get it done. And so the team of 4 coordinators were able to now focus on actually managing exceptions as opposed to key punching a bunch of orders. Fundamentally, we were able to resolve our SLA performance issues because now we could see everything, right? It's very hard to see what's going on when everything is single sheets of paper sitting on someone's desk. Well, there's a lot of noise to cut through there. So being able to see what is happening, where the transactions are, where the problems are, and being able to give instruction but receive instruction as well from our trading partners was the fundamental game changer to that team.
You see, a couple of things came to my mind when I listened, and Satish, I'm going to go to you on this, but I mean, that's the perfect description, I guess, of why there should be a glass pipeline. But even more so, one of the things you said about the manual system, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. I mean, and this may seem out of left field, but it's almost like the old days of telegraph, where a telegraph would go to a central office, but to get out to the field, somebody had to bicycle it out there. And so you have a lot of telegraphs coming in, a lot of manual processes going out. And if something breaks down in any one of those manual processes, it doesn't matter how fast you got the information in one part if it's not getting through to the entire end to end. I mean, that's what really it's all about. And Satish, when you think about this, I take away from the example Shira and Neil gave is that the pandemic was also a turning point or a real learning point for the provider side of the business of understanding and identifying this area of weaknesses. I mean, is that a fair statement?
That's definitely a fair statement. And just to add to what Shira and Neil gave the example is, it goes back to the people, process, and product. Looks like they had people and process, no product in terms of it's not digital, it's manual. So you need to have understanding the weakest link, but also what's the right technology, and is the technology solving the problem statement, and how do you adapt to change? And you have seen a lot of case studies as well, and there's a lot of companies that are coming up which says filing for bankruptcy. Yes, there's a lot of talk about Amazon killing those businesses, or it is the brick and mortar stores. But there's also a fundamental issue is, did they implement the right digital solutions where needed? Did they find this paperwork being done? And did they adapt to changes? It's a constant change landscape. What we did and what was the norm 5 years back, it's not the same. So you have to adapt to change, and the providers and the customers both have to adapt to change. When I say customers, for us, Cover Supply Chain, Shira, and all the 3PL customers, or the retailers are the customers. But we need to understand the customer landscape and what do they want to do, to be able to and be 2 steps ahead of them. I'm sure Neil is going to attest to that as well, but as a provider, we need to think ahead.
All right, so now and I want to go back to you, Neil, because let's go into the second part of this, because I want to drill down now, because we're talking concept and ideas. We've got the understanding. The takeaway from the first, as we indicated, is improve the level of collaboration and communication on the provider side to make sure you don't have those information gaps or manual stuff gaps in the system, and you're creating a digital pipeline. And I want to talk about that a little bit. When you look at the digital pipeline, and this is an interesting thing. It's one thing to get information. It's another thing to understand it. Sure, in another article we talked about a case study where a manufacturer of health equipment had trouble meeting delivery requirements to respond to the increasing demand. They went from their usual route of shipping into air, which of course cost money and didn't necessarily solve all of the problems, especially during the height of the pandemic. And so, we're saying, well, why did they have to scramble? Was it a lack of data? And you said this, and I wanted you to expand on this, and then I'm going to go to Neil. But you believe that it wasn't that the data was insufficient, but they could not likely read and understand what the data was telling them. So, we've got lots of data, we've got streamlined process, we addressed all of these things, but we still have to have understanding of that data. What was the issue there, do you think, or organizations like that?
Well, I think the issue is not being clear on what defines success, at not just at a total level, but the incremental steps, the incremental streams that ultimately feed your supply chain, that ultimately feed your customers' expectations. Each one of those has a KPI that's both leading and lagging, right? And so oftentimes it's not the issue that I can't get the data. It's the issue of, do you know what you're looking for? And do you know what those dials are, that the moment certain KPIs start to move in concert or decouple from one another, right? What is that behavior in each of those that then acts as a signal? It's very rarely one trigger. Oftentimes it's a combination of triggers. And so it's really about understanding what will give the stoplight, the red, yellow, green, of the totality of that part of the supply chain. And that's what you need to be following. And that evolves over time. So that's not, I said it once and I never have to look at it again. As the market goes through, different types of cycles, obviously COVID being an extreme version of one, but it's still a cycle, right? Those need to be calibrated to what is it that you're trying to do? What are the key touch points for your customers so that you can pick off where the early warning systems are?
Okay, now you see, this is, and Neil, I'm going to go to you with what Shira said, because when we talk about the glass pipeline, it isn't just a matter of having data flow through and digitized. It isn't just a matter of seeing the data clearly. It's actually being able to use it and apply knowledge. And so that's why I thought your comment was important here, because it isn't a technology issue alone or visibility of data. It's actually being able to, again, capture, and I like the way this was put, capture and synthesize multiple touch points internally with external trading partners, with all partners and stakeholders. Neil, from your standpoint in the spice, I mean, this is a key part of what you do. It's that connectivity and the ability to bring it all together, so you're not dealing with a segmented or a puzzle piece. Let's look at a puzzle where you got to try to figure it out. You actually put together the puzzle as the information progresses through. I mean, is that a safe bet?
Yeah. So, John, I think so. Sure, that's great. It kind of gives me some context here to elaborate. I think many organizations don't realize that their ERP and large software asset investments, they require fundamentally some data that has to be there, and they try to operate without it. And they don't realize that till it's actually quite late. So studies have shown that roughly 40% of data that sits in certain ERP systems are originated from outside the organization, from your suppliers, from your customers, from your logistics partners. And it's really important for that data to be in there. So some baseline data is really important to have in order for your supply chain operations to work smoothly. For example, your inbound supply chain, you must have product information from your suppliers. unit of measure, weight, so on and so forth. You need to know when your shipments are going to come in. ERP systems need that in order to get even basic visibility going. For your outbound supply chain, similar kind of information on your customer supply chain or outbound. Then you've got, tying together sort of what Shira said, is you've got to know what you're looking for ultimately. And then you fill the gaps with what else can I get from my extended supply chain that can really help me go from, fix the pain to build the muscle, right? So, the next level of capability, which is where you're going into that glass pipeline. And for us, the glass pipeline is in fact end-to-end visibility from source of your supply chain to the final consumption point. Can you see your entire inventory flow around your important metrics seamlessly? Or are there still any friction points in there? And I think that's kind of what we're aiming for. So hopefully that kind of gives a little bit of context. And the supply chain data network effectively creates that capability so that you have friction-free movement of the correct data, the data that you want, that's validated, it's delivered to you on time from the right entities into your organizational enterprise systems so that you can in fact function in the manner that you have set expectations with your customer team.
Okay, so now this is something that's interesting here because there's much talk about horizontal expansion of technology and vertical utilization. And during the pandemic, organizations discovered that many were only using 10 to 15 to 20% of their potential solutions or tools. And one of the things you said, Neil, is that a lot with ERP systems, for example, there's a lot of dormant data or non-access data from third parties. I mean, why is that? I'll go to you and then I'll go to Satish with that question. But Neil, why is it just collecting data? Is this what they call dark data? That just sort of...
Well, I think it's ERP systems, especially the sophisticated enterprise systems, have the capabilities, but they're not being utilized because oftentimes enterprises don't know where to get that data from, and that trading partners really need to provide that information in order for these assets to work the way that they're supposed to. So what the pandemic showcased is that the reason it showcased that is that earlier on, those data gaps were being filled manually. Somebody was filling out a form and entering product catalog data, for example. But when the pandemic, with that person staying at home and couldn't come in and enter that data, or really work from home wasn't set up really well, suddenly these systems didn't have that data. What they realized is that this data could have been acquired through digital networks through the supply chain, and life would have been just fine, as an example. But I think we're going further than that now. I think, one is to use these data that are externally sourced and integrated to ERP through trading partners for inventory management. I think the next big hurdle is going to be in carbon tracing that is coming up very soon. So if inventory management has been a challenge for companies for perfect visibility, carbon tracing for scope 3 emissions, for example, supplier data coming in is going to be a much bigger hassle. This is really, putting the frameworks in place now to kind of get beyond inventory management into some of, tackling some of the challenges that we will be seeing in the near future, the new challenges that we will have.
Okay, so based upon what Neil said and listening to what Shira said, Satish, I mean, it sounds like everyone was living in their own functional silos and not quite sure of how the information was coming in. I mean, it was a lot of organizations, listening to you, Neil, are surprised that when people couldn't come into the office and fill in the manual paperwork, the whole thing fell apart. For want of a nail, the kingdom was lost. I mean, are people now starting to recognize the responsibility in building the rapport and collaboration to be able to not only identify who that information should come from, but is it now easier for organizations, suppliers, et cetera, to interconnect with a lot of these ERP systems, to connect with the technology? Because, in the past, I go back to the days of EDI and XML and all those things where it was a limited access point. I mean, have we removed those barriers so that we can collect that information from the smallest supplier upstream to the biggest supplier downstream and everything in between? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. So if you think about, I know we all been here long enough, and in the past you would have a EDI connected into an ERP system and you're good. That was the enough to say, okay, I have the enablement. But as Neil said, ERP systems are needed and they are good what they do. But when you think about the inventory visibility, global inventory visibility, and be able to go beyond that, ERP systems have a lot of hidden data, and are they able to present that data in a way where you can make your decisions about what's the right location where the inventory is that I should be using to be able to satisfy a order. So that level of sophistication is what we are talking about, a glass pipeline, and be able to connect the systems to be able to have that information not only being brought in, but making that available in your glass pipeline is what is key. And the new systems, the technology is allowing you to enable that.
All right, so now, and I think now's the perfect time to introduce this graphic, because we've talked about it, but visualize, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So Neil, I'll go to you, and then Shira, and then Satish again. But Neil, I'll go to you. With regards to this graphic, I'm looking at this. What is this telling me? And what roles do each of your organizations play in this?
So at a very simple sort of explanation, this is an end-to-end view of an organization's extended supply chain. Looking from your source, from where you get your products, and managing and getting inventory visibility to the point that it is delivered to its final consumption point. And frankly, it actually is going even well beyond that. We call, the new circular economy is not just now at the doorstep of the consumer, but managing its return back into your organization from a carbon footprint tracing perspective and sustainability. That's your entire end-to-end glass pipeline. Where we play into this is bringing in all of the external parties' data that fit into existing transactional systems that large enterprises have, so that we can enable this supply chain. But again, we're one cog, one very important cog in that wheel, but we're one cog in that wheel.
Okay, so now you look at it, so really you're the automated from the source through. The second stage, do you divide this 1, 2, 3 up between all three of you, one taking 1, one taking 2, one taking 3, and then you put that together? I mean, like, for example, Shira, integration, the shelf, the inventory you referred to. That's the area in this last pipeline that you play a role, isn't it?
Well, I would say we actually play in multiple parts of this pipeline, because data does not simply come in. We feed data back out as well. These are interactive two-way relationships throughout the supply chain, right? And so when we talk about the obligation of trading partners, those obligations are in fact two-way, they are interactive. And so as a 3PL, yeah, I would say we cluster in the to shelf part of it, if you will. However, we feed everything that goes downstream, and we optimize everything from upstream. And so, our supply chain really does cover all three core elements, perhaps not to the same degrees at all times, but we definitely cover all. I think the interesting thing about being a 3PL is we actually do this for multiples of clients, multiples of customers. And so our glass pipeline is a series of overlays that all actually have to fit together.
Okay, so now, Satish, I want to bring you on about your role in this and the visibility, but I have a question for someone in the audience. Let me read this from Janita. Do you feel that the logistics industry's customers are moving fast enough away from legacy or old school connectivity to a more agile connectivity type of solution to easily onboard various players in the supply chain? Now, what you're just saying about the seamless overlap, Shira, I mean, Satish, what would you say to Janita in terms of this? Because, is a move away from legacy or old school connectivity, what does that mean to you? And you get that seamless integration that Shira was just talking about.
Definitely. So as Neil talked about, you need to have the baseline data or the master data. So potentially in the example that Janita is talking about, you could have a a master data system that's old, that has the products and could be getting the orders or the ASNs, but you could definitely digitize and bring in a, let's call it a order management solution or a WMS solution that are agile and newer technologies to be able to using a EDI partner or the B2B solution to be able to connect the two together, so that yes, you can still have your old technology. And I think as Neil or Sheila or collectively told is, you're not talking about changing every solution in your supply chain network. You need to say, what is my problem statement? What is the definition of success? What is my key element of a challenge or the weakest link? And define that and replace that with this new technology, so that you're not trying to do a big bang change and taking on too much. So, but you should be able to connect the dots and change it as needed.
All right, Neil, you have something to add, and June, let me know if we're answering your question.
Sure.
Go ahead, Neil.
Sure, I can certainly comment on that. So Juanita, thanks very much for the question. I think your question was focused around sort of, are we sticking with sort of legacy integration methodologies for ERP systems, or are we moving to something faster? So EDI, as you know, has been around for a long time. Its challenge with EDI has been, and now companies are realizing it more so than ever, is that it's garbage in, garbage out. EDI in itself doesn't do much to validate data or give you any insight into how good that data is and if it is in fact correct. It envelopes data and it sends it to you, and then you have to deal with it. Modern technologies today go well beyond that with supplier connectivity. They in fact are giving suppliers the tools to in fact create and work with you in an integrated business process for managing orders in the manner you need them to be managed, without disrupting the lives of the suppliers, because they can't work with multiple technologies either. So web-based systems today provide that set of capabilities. So what we're seeing is very large digital landscapes being sort of almost exploding, where thousands of suppliers are onboarded for a particular type of process to ensure that they're EDI-like, but they go much deeper. And then there's been a lot of talk about APIs, et cetera, so on and so forth. But again, these are all integration technologies. They don't really look after the quality of data that's coming from suppliers. So that is where we see the biggest movement in getting true digital transformation, is to work with newer technologies where suppliers have the right tools to work with you.
All right, so now, and I want to go to the next slide, and like I said, Anita, if you have any other additional thoughts or questions, please ask. I think we might have one before we move on. Wonderful. Yes, we answered the question. Let's go on to this, and I want to go on to the next slide because time is quickly getting away from us here. But Shira, to your point, the 1, 2, 3. Each of you have a role to play in each of these areas, but there is an overlap of collective experience and understanding in the end-to-end. I mean, that's the secret of all of this. You're not operating in functional silos with blinders on. I mean, is that the best way to describe this slide, Cheryl?
Absolutely. I mean, there are shared relationships. There are definitely, this is the view of an overall ecosystem, but frankly, it's a snapshot of a particular part of an ecosystem that extends on either side as well. But if you look at what's portrayed here, all the double arrows, the ups and downs that are throughout the slide, those show the interaction points. But also, if you notice, they all flow up and to the left and right as well. So this is a very fluid ecosystem, and I want to pick on a couple of points that Neil highlighted and that Satish highlighted as well, which is that it's really about not just getting the data in, but it is about the quality of the data, because the more you digitize and the more you proliferate the digitization across each of these different elements, there is a trust element to the data, right? You got to know that the data is as clean as it possibly can be so that you can trust what you're seeing and what it's telling you, so that there's clarity on the action that have to be taken, right? And that's really the totality of all of this. And then I think the other thing that Satish mentioned a few minutes ago is when you look at a digital transformation, it's not about turning every one of these boxes over at the same time. It's not even about, do you need to turn over every one of the boxes at the same time? It's about understanding what are the problems that you're solving for. So if I think about as SCI, we were solving for some very specific requirements. We needed to create more reliability in parts of our customer supply chain. We needed to increase the ability to provide insights and garner insights from the data. So that was about integration, but that was also about ensuring the scalable customer experience and consumer experience, right? Because again, as B2B and B2C, we operate with both sets of touch points, and those all need to be considered. And so when you're looking at the digital transformation, what do you need to do? Where do you need to start? It's about picking which of these boxes need to evolve and which of these actually don't. Solve for the first bit, and then as that change takes hold, it'll bring more clarity as to whether or not other parts of the ecosystem need to be transformed as well. You can actually affect transformation by going after smaller pieces, but landing them, getting them all the way implemented so that the noise level goes away, so that there's more clarity about where to go next.
Okay, now you see, now I want to go to you, Satish, on this, because you may raise an interesting point here, and of course, Neil, in your description, these are all components. Would you call this, Satish, a blueprint to follow of different elements and components? We've taken that one graphic, we've drilled down further to really identify those areas where we have to work on. And every company is different and dynamics are changing. I mean, is this the blueprint for that kind of, would you call agile connectivity, agile intelligence? Do you know what I'm saying, Satish?
Yes. So, but this is one of the many blueprints, right? It is a defined way to go, but each of these are unique critical components, but even within that, as Sheila mentioned, each of these solve different use cases. Now, if you just drill down to, let's focus on the order management on the WM and TMS. Order management will solve your inventory visibility. It will solve your order orchestration. It will solve your pre and post customer experiences. But do we need to go and implement all of them day one? No, you could go in stages. But also what is key is each of these systems are integrated in a way, and they all have to play a role. For example, you need to have the right integration system so that you get in the right data into both a OMS, a WMS, and TMS. But at the same time, how big is your network? You can't ship to every customer just from a store, but you need to have a warehouse management solutions, so that if you have customers in your West Coast and East Coast, I'm talking about US, but again, when you go to Canada, it changes dramatically. To make sure that you have the right network setup and the right technology setup, and then you have to have the transportation system where you need to make sure that you are building your both the inbound and the outbound shipments effectively to be able to ship the products in a timely way. And those are all key elements in this blueprint, but there's a lot more in the supply chain blueprint that comes beyond this. For example,
well, you know what I'm thinking as I'm looking at this, and I want to go how we turn to connectivity and digital enablement. Neil, I want to go back to you, because as I'm listening to this, it seems that a lot of people have traditionally, maybe that's the front end architectural focus that Sheila was talking about, but a lot of people looked at this as being a technology issue. When I look at the blueprint and drilling down, it's the expertise of the providers to understand the arrows and the boxes and the multi-directions and all of those things. I mean, we're not just talking about technology, are we here?
Yeah, I agree. If you wouldn't mind, just flip back. I'll make some points as people are still. It is a big graphic, so let people absorb that. Let me answer that in the following manner. What's the value? You know, I guess, and since we're coming up to time, I'll speed it up. I think, you know, fundamentally, organizations need to look at the value of their integrations, of how does that, what, if I'm going to integrate something, the point Satish made, how is this going to add value to my organization? Do I need inbound ASN data? What's the value? Fundamentally be able to answer that, right? Once you've answered that, the second important thing is to know what's the quality of my data. So if I look at inbound supply chain, how good is the data that the suppliers are sending me? Am I relying on EDI, garbage in, garbage out, or do I fundamentally have good data and therefore the right tools with the supplier? The third thing I want to know is, well, do I have enough information from all my trading partners, or am I just shooting for 20, 30% connectivity? Because that doesn't give you that end-to-end visibility that you're promising to your customers. When you've achieved all three, then I think you can, you know, paint this bigger picture towards a supply chain transformation, fit your objectives in, and then you build towards a new capability based on that. And I'll give you one example from this picture. At least in the retail environment, one really big capability that everybody's looking at where all of this comes together is vendor dropship. You know, the ability, can I have a perfect data network where I have the vendor's inventory available to me, that my 3PL can act as a 4PL or a 5PL on my behalf, get an order orchestrated on my behalf, and drop ship directly from a vendor's location or my location, make that decision for me, and satisfy the customer and meet our SLA and objectives. This requires a phenomenal amount of information coming together in a variety of different systems to provide that set of digital capabilities to the customer. So I'll just stop there.
Well, you know, it's an interesting thing because it raises, as Smita Sharma raised the question, how can we ensure that digitization is a success? Are there any do's and don'ts along this journey? I mean, like if we look at this, and Cheryl, I'll go back to you. If we look at this, what Neil was just talking about, what you've been talking about, what Satish talked about, that's really one of the do's, isn't it? That's really coming together. I mean, how would you answer that question?
I think for me, first of all, I think it's a great question. For me, it starts with being very clear on the problems you're trying to solve and having very clear definition of what that outcome is intended to be. A KPI, what is it? Because that will act as the guidepost to which of the levers you then look at in this blueprint and decide to prioritize. I think the other thing for me, and I would say this with any digital transformation, but particularly, if you're trying to do it at a level of scale, is the sequencing of when you do things is massively important, because there is noise before things calm down. Data doesn't come in clean the first time, right? So there's a whole getting the data treatment to align that fundamentally is important. And then, I know a number of us have said it throughout the last hour, fundamentally, this also comes down to the data is only part of the story, how it's interpreted, how it's actioned, the users of that information, what are the follow-on actions, the people side of this. That change management is extremely significant to the success of any digital transformation.
All right. So now let's go here. And as I hope that at least partially answered the question. I think you gave a pretty good breakdown there, Shira. I want to go to the next question because it leads into that. Can you provide additional details in terms of ESG data gathering challenge? Because Shira, you talked about the quality of data isn't always a top thing. I mean, let's start with you, Shira. Then I want to go to you, Satish, and then ultimately bring it home with Neil, because we're coming up to the hour. I mean, is ESG data even more complicated?
It's complicated because it's not always obvious in terms of how to get at it. right? ESG data is a composite of a number of other transactions and factors. And if only some of it is digitized and the rest of it isn't, some of it is relative, the measures are relative to the total. It's not, as I would say, as linear a process as just being able to get at data. It has a bit more interpretation that needs to come around it. So I think that's why it's a little bit more complicated. Okay,
and Satish, to add to that, and thank you, Shira, because that really opens up things. What would you say in terms of the ESG scenario and the other complexity? I mean, has this elevated the demand for the kind of connectivity we're looking at today with the glass pipeline?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, as Shira alluded to, it is understanding what's the data components, what are the problem statements you're trying to solve, and ensuring that the baseline data is available and make sure that the system allows you to bring it in and make it visible to be interpreted by the people. So yes, it is complex, but you need to understand what you are trying to solve.
All right. Listen, Neil, and again, there's maybe 1 or 2 minutes left, and I know we could talk about this for a while, but when we turn, the question, how do we turn connectivity into digital enablement? I'll go back to those graphics. Is there anything that you'd add in any closing comments relative to that? I mean, I think we've covered that, or have we left? So, are there still answers to be sought?
No, I think we've covered everything. I think there was an ESG question, which also I have raised, or I think I've covered that. I think collecting data is going to be a big challenge in that area. And I think a network approach is the one that's going to be likely the most successful. And it's going to be a big demand. And where do you fulfill your order from the lowest carbon footprint impact area, optimized against your best service level capability? That's where order management systems would also come into play. But fundamentally, we're all coming together to tackle this problem with various systems in place.
All right. Well, thank you, Shira Yaskovich, Satish Kulkarni, and Neil Sharma. I think that, like I said, what's great about this is it's on demand, the recording. So I'm sure you'll get some additional play out there. There's going to be a subsequent paper coming out covering what we've discussed. But just really appreciate the insight and taking the complexity and making it understandable for this. And just for everyone who tuned in and listened today, thank you for your questions. Again, I hope that you've gained some additional meaningful insight beyond the conceptual level. And I'll just like to say to everyone, have a good day, and we will look forward to talking with you soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.